So, Brad, I'm 19 years old, and I'm driving across the country with 4 friends, and we hit, over the course of 4 weeks, we hit 36 states, right? But we're stopping in Yellowstone to camp. We've got the guitars out. It's about 10:30 at night. We're around a campfire. The van is parked about 100 feet away. We're singing and camping and making hot dogs and whatever. Like, no alcohol. We're all just having fun. And all of a sudden, a man steps into the firelight. You know how you kind of can't see anything if you're in a really dark environment, and then all of a sudden, you know, like 5 feet from the fire, you can't see anything, that kind of thing?
I've heard this one, and he's got a hook for a hand.
Anyway, I never saw those 3 friends again, Brad. I never saw them again.
But you found out one thing. You're a hell of a good runner.
It turns out I can sprint. All you need to do is be faster than the other guy. That's all you need to do.
That's right.
And that's Dave Kellett's method for escaping a bear. All right, so anyway, the man steps into the firelight, scares the living hell out of us. It's a park ranger. And he's speaking really slow, and he goes, boys, are you aware of your situation? And we go, our situation? And he goes, you may not realize it right now, but you are perfectly surrounded by about 500 head of bison. And we go, I'm sorry, what? He goes, take a minute, let your eyes adjust away from the light and look around you. And I turn away from the firelight, my eyes adjust, and I just see movement. I don't see shapes in the sense of like a holistic bison. I just see like the undulation of 1,000 bodies, right? And I go, oh, and he goes, now I want you to feel into your pockets. Does anybody have the keys to that van over there? And my friend goes, yeah, I've got the keys. He goes, here's what we're going to do. You're going to leave everything you're carrying right there. You're all going to stand up. I am going to grab 3 of these logs from the fire and start waving them around. You are going to walk slowly to your van and sleep in that van tonight. I will put your fire out. And we're like, oh my God.
Oh my God.
He starts taking he's got like 2, I don't know, 3 foot, 4 foot long sticks that he's lit on fire, and he starts waving them back and forth, kind of like you would wave in a plane, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. And we get up and we're all like, oh God. My friend, it was amazing, trying to get the key into the keyhole. He's like, oh God.
His hands are shaking, clackety.
Because the park ranger had been like, try to be as quiet as you can. It's like, jiggle, trying to get the keys in.
Oh my God.
We get into the van, right? And then we go to sleep. The park ranger very kindly puts the fire out. We wake up the next morning, and I don't know if you've ever done this. Have you ever pulled into a campsite at night, and you wake up in the morning, and the campsite is very different than what you imagined it to be? Like you thought there must have been a stream over here, but it actually was a hill, that kind of thing. The next morning we wake up, and the field that had previously been all around us completely trampled and just covered with bison shit. I mean, we had been fully surrounded by bison. And I don't know how he saw us. I don't know how he saw that we were surrounded by bison. I don't know any of the situation around it but we woke up and it was so evident that there were 500, 600 heads of bison around us. And we were in there going, around a fire, 19 going, wasting away again in Margaritaville, whatever it was we were singing. Something stupid. But I love that the park ranger's like, these 4 city idiots, I gotta go save them.
Oh my God. And there's nothing more terrifying than when somebody comes in and starts speaking softly and slowly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's nothing more terrifying.
Because the first question was, there were a couple of questions right out of order, but the first one of the first ones was, is that your van over there? And you're like, what is this? Where is this leading immediately? You're like, why would you ask, is that our van? He's like, all right, I need you to get those keys, and you're going to walk very slowly over to that van. And it's just amazing. We had no sense of it. The bison apparently had just been quietly grazing and then had slowly ensconced us with a ring all around the fire, and we had been camping kind of by ourselves. No one else was in the campground.
Would they have hurt you? Would they? I mean, I don't know what the danger was.
Do you know how big an American buffalo is?
Huh?
American buffalo are gigantic. And it was late summer, so there were baby buffalo in the herd. So they would absolutely have protected the babies if they thought we. Oh. But yeah, buffalo. If one of our songs had gone so wrong that it had triggered some kind of fear or flight response on the buffalo's part, we absolutely could have had trouble on our hands. They're like, we hate Neil Young. What are you doing? Stop it. No, you cannot go back to Paperback Writer from the Beatles. Don't sing that one again. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about getting trampled by buffalo and making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal, Dave Kellett, nature lover and cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. This show, by the way, is going out live to our VIP friends and members over at ComicLab Live Gab. Remember, you can join us at patreon.com/comiclab at the $10 level and watch the show live. It is also archived every week. So if you missed that specific live episode, you can watch it later in the day or later in the week.
And this show is being brought to you by Wacom, the good people at Wacom, Wacom.com, makers of the Wacom One, the powerful, portable, professional tablet that you are absolutely going to love. And Dave, I could only imagine if you would have had that Wacom One with you out there in the middle of the bison, things might have gone a little bit differently.
I don't know how that would have gone. And I'll tell you what, the story would have ended a little differently had I had my Wacom One with me. Because if there's one thing American Buffalo are scared of, it's a really good sketch artist. They know to stay away if someone's really good on their Wacom One.
That's right. They know better. They know better than to deal with somebody like that.
In all seriousness, though, we do give a shout out and a thank you to our sponsors for this week's show, Wacom at Wacom.com. And Brad, we've got a weighty topic to start off the show this week, don't we, my friend?
Wait a minute. I've been searching ever since we've been saying, what if you would have sung a different song, the bison, and I knew there was a joke in there, and I've been turning it. I looked down to the live stream. Shane says, maybe a little Buffalo Springfield to soothe them. There was I knew the joke was out there. Shane had it all along.
Buffalo Springfield. Now my mind is racing to think of any other Buffalo references I can think of. I got
the
nothing.
best I could come up with it was a bicentennial joke, and there was nothing there, so I didn't use it.
The way you scare off a bison, let them know that you mean business, is you just hold up a bucket of buffalo wings, and then they're like, "Oh God, oh no." So Brad, this first topic for this week is a good one because it springboards off a discussion we had, a few weeks ago of an Evil Inc. comic that referenced death. So let me read this. This comes in from patreon.com/comiclab backer. And it says, hello, Brad and Dave. In a recent Comic Lab, you mentioned how some readers were offended by a death in Evil Inc. Now, Brad's comics have had deaths before. Even Dave's family-friendly Sheldon has featured death in a rather touching story where Grandpa finds an old camera, but also the one with the lion dying in the hospital bed. Could you go into more detail about whether death is or is not appropriate in some comics and how it should be handled? Whether death needs special consideration, or can you just plunge in like any other topic? Thank you. Love the show. Bradley J., what is your take on this? This is a weighty matter. Death in a comic strip.
Well, I'll tell you what, ever since that happened a month or so ago, and really, honest to goodness, it was only one reader that had gotten upset, but they had gotten so upset that they were posting like in multiple platforms about literally what has Evil Inc. come to when death is a punchline.
Right.
But it was only one person, but it was enough to make me start thinking like, okay, well, let's think about this. And I having thought about it, and by the way, death was a punchline last week again, so clearly I haven't learned my lesson. But what I've come to in my own philosophy of comics is that there is a capital D death and there's a lowercase d death. There's two different types of death. Okay?
All right, this is interesting.
And
go with it.
One of them is a capital D death, is a death of a, for example, a main character, somebody that you've gotten to know over a long period of time, right? You've made an emotional connection to that character. That's a capital D death. Also, even if it's not a character you've known for a long time, if the death is particularly graphic, right? And we all know, a lot of blood. If anybody has seen any episode of Invincible, the animated series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's also what I would consider a capital D death. Then you've got a lowercase lowercase d death,
Mm-hmm.
where some background character is walking down the street and falls down a manhole cover. The manhole was open and boom, falls right down the sewer. That's kind of a lowercase d death because we don't really know the person. We don't see the death. It's a different kind of death. It's still somebody that in the fictional world has ceased to breathe, but it's a different type of death. And what happens is, I think, especially if you're doing humor, if it's a lowercase d death, it's a little easier to get past than a capital D death. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do. Yeah, it's all about stakes and about emotional investment, and so that's a really good distinction for writing, is that the capital D, lowercase d. It's a little bit of version, Brad. Tell me if you think there's a parallel to how Mel Brooks defined tragedy versus comedy. Do you remember this? Mel Brooks said, tragedy is when I stub my toe. Comedy is when you fall down a manhole and die. And so that's a version between capital D and little d, is that when a character that you love, that means a lot to you, that has stakes in the story, that has built up over hundreds of pages, that's a capital D death. When it's some walk-on or a henchman or somebody you have no emotional involvement with that dies, that's a lowercase d death. So yeah, I think that's a worthwhile distinction. I do think that, and broadly speaking, taking a step back from it, death has its place in comics in the same way that every human aspect of existence has a place in a comic. We write about either to soothe the wounds of existence, or to make life more enjoyable, or to make life more relatable, or to tell our readers that they are not alone. There's 1,000 reasons why we write, right? But death can be a part of all of those things, about telling you that you are not alone, that give you courage to face a thing that we all must face eventually, to sometimes laugh in the face of death, because gallows humor absolutely has a place in this world. And in terms of not going insane in the face of a lot of death, right? That is a legitimate psychological response. But I think it does, if it is a capital D death, I think that's where we tend to say, slow down, do it right, make it have a point, make it have meaning, make it have worth in your storytelling. A lowercase death, lowercase d death, to describe Brad's, I actually think there's something to that description, by the way. I think that's really handy. It tends to be a little bit more, it needs to happen for the plot, or it needs to happen to advance the scene, right? It's less stakes, but it still needs to happen. One of my favorite things, can I do a side journey real quick, Brad? Whenever I've been watching Marvel movies now with my family, whenever sort of a henchman or a walk-on character gets killed, like Captain America punches a man and clearly breaks his neck, my favorite thing to do with my kids now is I'll be lying on the couch and I'll go, "That man had a family!" And just ruin the moment. That man had people who loved him. Just because you realize that the violence is desensitized, and so if you throw a sensitivity back into it, it ruins the moment. Like, that man had people that loved him, and it just ruins any Marvel movie. Black Panther, what'd you do? That person had a child. Anyway, keep going.
Well, and knowing that even like I said, even though it was just one person, and by the way, I can hear you at home, Brad, you always tell us, never listen to a reader, always listen to your readers. I know I'll be honest with you, I was a bit of a hypocrite on this one because death is such a big topic, I guess, but it did seep into my approach, because the next time I had a little d death in the comic, which, like I said, was just last week, I kind of needed it. I wanted to set up a cliffhanger moment. So one character has an outburst of energy, and out in the distance we can hear screech, thud, and then voices saying, "My baby, my baby." And that was the end of that page. And then it was going to be another several days before the next page. I wanted that. Boom. Now sit with it, right? That was how I wrote it. By the way, I also wrote that before all this things happened. But then when I had to actually do it to my readers, it was like, oh, okay. All right, here we go. And what I did was, and maybe this is helpful, I don't know. When I posted that on Patreon and on social media, I put a note there instead of my usual outreach. which has been a lot of, sign up for my email list these days, right? Instead of my usual outreach, it was, listen, if you're concerned about that last panel, go to evilink.com. In the blog, I've got a spoiler, and you can find out what happens next. And the spoiler said, Baby is the name of a pet parrot who is going to eventually factor into the storyline in another way, but it's not a real baby. Baby is the name of a pet parrot. And I even, turning into a big softie, originally it was going to be a pet dog. But I also know from experience that a lot of times people are more sensitive about dogs than they are humans.
Very often, yeah.
I knew it couldn't be a dog. It couldn't be a cat. That would be even more upsetting. So I sat there with my sketchbook and I'm like, okay, I'll make him a parrot because that's lower down on the list. There's still going to be bird lovers who are going to be very upset, but not so much as the dog lovers. And I'll make him a parrot. And it also is funny because parrots can talk, and then that's going to make this a lot more interesting to write. So, yeah, I actually, for the first time ever, voluntarily offered a spoiler because I knew that between not only death, but baby death was going to be something that was very much concerning to my readers. So I voluntarily said, listen, I did this for a cliffhanger. I did this specifically to get your attention. If you want to be let off the hook, here's how to do it.
Right. So like you, for Drive, for plot and story, I've had a few minor characters die to basically either advance the story or advance a main character's storyline. But with Sheldon, when I've dealt with death, it's usually been dealing with the after effects of death. And I think because Sheldon's had real loss, both his parents are dead and he's being raised by his grandparents or grandfather. And so there's been a couple of storylines, some much longer than others, where we've talked about Sheldon being alone or Sheldon not having parents or missing his parents or the aftermath of death and that kind of thing. And that has been more introspective, philosophical, how to process death and how does one process death. Whereas Drive, because it's an action story, it's been more story advancement. But there's even been situations where the main character, her ex-husband has died in the story, and their marriage ended badly. But there's a whole subplot where she's asking the government for permission to bury him. They would normally handle it themselves, but what I'm getting at there is, because death is real, it happens to all of us. It comes even in our characters' lives. It's worth showing how it impacts their life as a way of rounding out their character, giving you a sense of how they deal with the bad, not just the good. But I think in the moments where you're writing it philosophically or how to handle it, those are the moments where you really slow down. It's a very different thing when you're writing lowercase d in an action story. That's a different sort of thing. But Brad, why do you think the human heart wants to write about death? Just to get philosophical for a minute.
Oh, well, because it's comedy usually hits best in places where people have a shared experience, right? And this is one shared experience that we all have, no matter which walk of life we come from, no matter who we are, and we can be very, very different in any number of different ways. But this is one way that we're all the same. It's like that's why we laugh. That's why there's an emotional almost need to kind of whistle past the graveyard or laugh at the grave site because you're not the one in it. You're the one walking by.
You will be eventually, but you have to laugh now because you're not in it. Yeah.
But it's very interesting. Scott Kurtz, I don't know whether you've seen recently, has been doing a series of comics about death. Have you seen this?
I have.
It's based on his father's, the fact that his father has dementia, has declining health, and basically Mort, Scott's new comic, is about this guy that's trying to take care of his father, and the Grim Reaper just shows up and starts living at the house, which if you're dealing with somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's disease or any other kind of debilitating situation, I'm sure it feels like the Grim Reaper has just showed up and is sitting there at the kitchen table with you. And this series of comics is exactly that. These conversations with death as a person. And I think it's some really, really good work. And I think part of that is obviously Scott's very good at his craft. And the other part is that death is something that touches us all. And it's something we all have in common.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most universal things about art making in human history has been that art very often touches on death. Like I for some reason, my mind flitted on that mosaic that they found, the Roman tile mosaic. They unearthed, it was a few years back, but it was a beautiful mosaic of a skeleton reclining with a glass of wine. Yeah. And I'm forgetting the inscription, but it's something like "Drink and be well, for remember you will die as well," or something like that. But what I'm getting at that is the universal that we all have in our life. Like Brad said, we're all born, we all eat, and we all sleep, and then we die. And so humor touches on all those. And I think also it is a legitimate survival mechanism in the case of comedy, that as a survival mechanism, you have to laugh at death sometimes, because otherwise the weight of it, the psychological weight of existentialism hits you and you're like, oh God. I remember, Brad, I had a legitimate response. I had been out walking around the block kind of a thing, and got into my desk, was working and my desk is sort of abutting a window, as you remember. I'm looking out, and a 4,000-pound tree branch, not a branch, a bough, I guess, comes crashing down onto the sidewalk. And I had to laugh because I was there a couple seconds previous. And it was not a choice of a laugh. I just laughed at it because it is ridiculous sometimes how instantaneous, nonsensical, illogical death can come for us. So it is a natural response to laugh at that illogic of it. As sort of a survival mechanism. But anyway, to get back to the question, though, as far as is death appropriate to share in comics? I think yes. I think obviously, with more kit gloves than you would a topic about like, oh, I drank too much coffee today, right? It's not the same thing at all. It does need to be given special consideration. Yes, I would say. Can you plunge into it like any other topic? I wouldn't recommend it. But then again, when it comes to humor writing, it's a very different. I will go back to, it's a very different thing than when you're dealing with death as a serious philosophical introspective moment, or death with a capital D, as Brad said. Brad, any final thoughts for our question asker on this one?
No, other than the fact is that I try to avoid. There are some looks, there are some parts of comics lexicon that I try to avoid because they're dated. But this is one where I wonder how universal this is. Whenever I've got to draw a little d death, I always revert to that X for the eyes and the tongue hanging out, right? Because it seems to me that it's hard to get very upset about something that's so clownish as drawing a character with an X for their eyes. Like literally, there's not even an eye there. Like, think about it. If you drew an eye just staring out into space, that'd be creepy. You put in an X there is clownish, right? And a lot of times we also draw it with the tongue hanging out. And I think we do that, or at least I did that last week because it was like I had to draw the parrot lying there, but to be the reveal. And it's like, okay, now how are you going to handle this? And I wanted to know from you, do you revert to that too for the same kind of over-the-top clownishness that affords? Or what's the psychological reason for the X for the eyes deal?
Well, it's a great question. I have never shown a dead body in Drive because I would have to treat it somewhat realistically. So I think the camera just kind of carefully pans away at key moments in that story. You know what I mean? Like, well, we'll look over here. What's going on over there? But in Sheldon, whenever I've had to have death comedically, yes, absolutely. It's the X in the eyes and the tongue hanging out. But it because you're right. You have to go big or go home in those comedic moments. Yes. But I will say I had one final thought that I wanted to touch on with death, and that is, you have to read the room. And what I mean by that is culturally, there are moments where death is so omnipresent and so painful that it is not worth dipping a toe in those waters right then. And it's sort of a version of too soon. You know what I mean? And here's where I'm going with this. It is not an accident that during the 4 or 5 years of World War II, virtually all American films stopped making gangster movies. They stopped making shoot 'em up movies. Everyone wanted a movie about romance or about a country pastoral or about a simple, silly comedy because they wanted to get the hell away from death. They didn't want to watch somebody being shot because all their brothers, cousins, and sisters were over in Europe getting shot, right? So Hollywood stopped making those movies. One of the best moments that I've ever seen that captured is the otherwise not so great movie, The Postman, where Kevin Costner is in the post-apocalyptic world, right? They're all dying. They're all starving. They all have various levels of disease. It's basically a fascist local government that's running them. So they're watching movies, and they were watching, I think, Wizard of Oz, and then the reel breaks, and so they put on a war movie, and everybody starts booing because when life is misery, you don't want more of it, you know? And so what I'm saying is, it is worth considering that we are in a global pandemic and there is a lot of death on everyone's heart. And so maybe now is not the time to really do a glorified version of death, a desensitized glorified. It's worth the philosophical and introspective version, absolutely. But I don't know that now is not the time to do the, hey, look at this, Quentin Tarantino style, where everybody's dying, that kind of thing. Brad, what are your thoughts?
On the other side of that, speaking movies, just this weekend, I was looking for something to play in the background while I was inking, and I opened up HBO, the HBO Max app, and for some reason, it displayed a movie from, it had to have been late 70s, very early 80s, a Burt Reynolds movie that I'd never heard of. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how have I never, it had Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise, brought back all of my Caddyshack vibes. And I'm like, how have I never seen this movie? And it was called The End. You ever seen this?
I have not, no.
It's about a man who discovers he's got 6 months to live and decides that he's going to off himself. Okay. When I tell you that it was the funniest movie I've seen in a long time, and I was laughing out loud at this movie that dealt with a very serious subject, I'm telling you, it was funny as hell. It had Carl Reiner in it, and Norman Fell. It was wonderful. But going back to that whole read the room thing, in order to pull this off, again, they had to go over the top. It had to be almost Mel Brooks level of clownishness in terms of how you handle that. Because if you got even a little bit serious, it was going to get jarring. It was going to get, even sad. But this person had to be a crooked real estate developer and all this other stuff. You could write a volume on the psychology behind that movie. I don't think it did well at the box office because, like I said, and it was I think maybe his directorial debut, Burt Reynolds. But I'm telling you, I laughed out loud at this. But you couldn't do it if you treated even with the grain of seriousness. It had to have been. And it's the only word I can come up with, clownish. And I think that's part of that whole thing that you were just talking about, in that you've got to be very careful about how you approach this topic.
Yeah, and in a case like that, an entire movie like that, it a little bit echoes how 20-year-olds deal with death, which is they literally laugh in the face of death because they think it's not coming for them, And so you talk to 20-year-olds and topics of death are almost always a source of jokes because for them it is 60, 70, 90 years away and they could care less. And you know what I mean? What's funny, though, is people in their 30s, 40s, they start to experience the loss of their parents and their family members. And then so that kind of humor drips away. There's a very specific stage in life, and it's a 20-year-old about how they talk about death. And a Dom DeLuise movie about death feels like it's got 20-year-old energy to me. But
it definitely did.
But anyway, so yes, there is a place for it. I think it is not something to be just jumped into like you would another topic. But good luck with it in your own writing, and hope that answer was helpful to you.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
All right, Brad, well, our next question comes in from Jay Lark over at patreon.com/ComicLab, and it says, "Hey, Brad and Dave, just out of curiosity, have either of you written or considered writing a novel or a work of short fiction? Dave's working on a children's book, but how about something that's all prose? Is there anything about the medium you dislike, or is it simply that you prefer a more visual storytelling method? Thanks for everything, Lark." So, Bradley J. Geiger, I turn it to you. Long-form prose, novels, novelettes, novellas. I love that we have both novelettes and novellas, by the way, as a subset. Is it a novella? No, it's a novelette. Oh, well, fancy. Anyway.
Well, then, I'll take 3.
It's like when Chevy used to market cars in the 50s, like, it's the new novelette. Da-da! Anyway, keep going. So, Brad, have you ever considered writing prose, long-form prose?
I have, and I've done a couple for Patreon. I just don't. So there's a couple things. Number one, I don't think I'm very good at it because they didn't get a whole lot of response, and I think I did 1 or 2 short stories. They didn't get a huge response, and I'm not really sure I'm good at it. And also, there's this. So it took me a long time to get to where I thought I was doing good at comics. It took me, I always thought I was doing good, but it wasn't verifiable until much, much later, right, if you know what I mean. And I realized along that journey that I had so much to learn about comics. That's the reason we do this show, is that we both, that there was so much to learn that we want to share some of it and make the other people who are experiencing this maybe make their journey that much easier. But there was so much to learn about comics, and it took me such a long time to learn it. And I also know that I get a little bit disgusted, even though I was once one of those people, when somebody comes into comics for the first time and they say, "This is easy, I can do this." Well, that doesn't, you put a drawing, you put some words on top of it, you got a comic. This is very easy. And that does happen, and it always kind of makes me, I'll give you an example, and you've been here. You're at a comic convention. That guy comes up and says, "My last unemployment check hits next week. I'm going to start a comic today. I want to buy the How to Make Webcomics book so that I can start making money after that last unemployment check hits." Right? We've been in those situations.
We've been there. That's happened more than once. And
you want to shake the person and say, this takes a long time. It takes a long time to learn how to do it so well that you are able to turn this into a profession and stuff like that. And so, with that in mind, I every time I get tempted to I'm going to start a series of novels, or is tempted to, I've been told I've got a good voice, I'm going to do voiceover work. Right? That's happened too. And it's like, wait a minute, these are all professions. These are all arts of their own. It would take me, if I stopped doing comics today and started doing voiceover work tomorrow, it's going to take me 10 years to get so good at voiceover that I can turn that into a career. I feel the same way about prose. I haven't put the time in, and it would take so much time to do that well that it's, at this point, it's better off I stick with comics. What are your thoughts on that? Am I overthinking this?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, sometimes it's helpful to think of this in a wildly disparate field. For example, if Brad suddenly said, "I'm going to be a stonemason," Imagine how many years it would take Brad to get good at stonemasonry, right? Or if Brad's like, I'm going to be a physician. I'm sure I could do that within a couple of months. No,
Right.
it's like only by jumping into another field do you see how egotistical it is to say, I'm good at comics. I will instantly be good at prose. Now, listen, do I think, like Brad, that I could get good at prose? Sure. I actually do think I can get pretty good at prose. Do I have ideas that I would love to do in prose? Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple that, and frankly, I could do them in comics, but I think they would just be better in prose. Like long form stories. That being said, I've also thought maybe someday it might be fun to take my existing Drive universe and do a short story or a novella in prose rather than in comics. I may do that. And it may just be that the strength of familiarity and strength of working in that world might carry that prose to success, even though I don't work in prose all that often. You know what I mean, Brad? Like it's because I know the world so well, it might still work and the fans might be forgiving. But yeah, I do think it's a bit of ego to think like, well, I'm good at a form of art, so I'll be good in the other form of art. Well, not really, not necessarily. It might be. Both Brad and I are good writers at this point. We might be good, but there are whole considerations of pacing, of reveals, of character development that takes place in prose that is wildly dissimilar from comics. And it's a little bit egotistical to think that you can take all of your immense writing skills from comics and immediately transport them over to prose.
Yeah, it's kind of like that Dunning-Kruger syndrome that we talk about in the past, where if you don't know anything about a topic, it's very easy to believe that you're great at that thing, right? Yeah. And then the more you learn about it, the more you find out that there's a lot more to learn about it that you didn't even know about. This is the same thing. Now, I've kind of spitballed in my mind with the idea of bringing in somebody whose background was in novel writing, and then give them the first a couple of books of Evil Inc. and say that's the source material. Now write that as a novel. Like you can take the same storylines, but just write it as a novel or a short story. That I'd like to experiment with sometime to bring somebody in who really knew what they were doing. But then again, if they knew what they were doing, they've got their own stories to tell. They don't want to tell mine, you know. But I would like to see how that would work. But to do it myself, no. And also because I am a comic artist and because I'm a cartoonist, why would I waste my time doing that when I should be and could be doing comics? Comics is my thing. Why am I doing this other thing?
Well, Brad, now to be fair, that's like saying like I can only do one thing forever, and I'm wedded to this, and that's my only thing that I can do. There is a very good argument as we. I mean, I made a documentary film. I had never made one before. You can branch out. Before the pandemic, I started making a TV talk show, and that will eventually happen, but not yet. Yeah. So you can branch out and do other things. I mean, for example, Mel Lazarus of Mama and Miss Peach wrote 2 or 3 pretty successful mystery novels. All right.
Oh, really?
Gary Trudeau of Doonesbury had a musical and a TV show. But the TV show, as far as I know, did fairly well, actually. So you can absolutely have a cartoonist that goes into, I'm sure there's more that are just not on the tip of my tongue, that other cartoonists that have done other things. If Brad set his mind over the next couple of years to writing prose, 2 or 3 years from now, 4 years from now, with a little bit of elbow grease, he could have a working novel at the end of it, and it might be pretty good. And then by the second and third one, it might be much better. What I'm getting at is you're not necessarily wedded, Brad, to comics. It's like the discussion. I go back to this a lot. That discussion that David Malky and I had driving to downtown LA once, where I said I want to get good at comics, really good at comics, and then branch out to other topics. And Dave Malky said, I want to get really good at a bunch of topics and lift them all up like a rising tide so that I can jump back and forth. Long story short, we both ended up, he doing more of the polymath approach, me doing more of the singular approach and then branching out. It both worked out fine. We both have been able to work on multiple projects. But like, let's take, for example, podcasting, Brad. You would think to cartoonists, well, cartoonists tend to be a little antisocial. They tend to be a little bit non-talkers. Right. So 2 cartoonists in a podcast, that wouldn't be very good. But I think as the years have gone on, we've gotten better and better and better. We've applied ourselves to it. We've stuck with it. We've stuck to a schedule, and we've gotten more blossoming into who we can be as podcasters. It wasn't automatic, but I think it's a little too limiting to say a cartoonist can only be a cartoonist and stick to your lane.
That's true. That's true. Although I guess what I was saying was that it would be for me, it would be kind of like I've only got so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And if I'm gonna take hours away from comics, then I'm taking a risk because comics is what I do for a living.
Yes.
Although I agree with you, the one part of that that's super operative for me is that you've got to want to do that. You've got to really have a passion for it. Podcasting, I've got a passion for. Talking with you on every week, absolutely highlight of my week, bar none.
Yeah.
Without that kind of passion, we wouldn't be very good at that.
Can I say I immediately understand what you mean, because for years I have had a longstanding desire to learn Spanish classical guitar, like Sergio. Now I'm blanking on his name, but anyway. But like you, the passion was not enough to say, I want to be less good of a cartoonist, but somewhat good in Spanish classical guitar.
Right.
It was always like, no, I'd rather get to be as good a cartoonist I can be and shine the guitar. I'll maybe in a second life, I'll learn that one someday, but not now. You're right that I have made a choice that I really want to focus on becoming the best cartoonist I could be, rather than becoming passingly okay in a bunch of hobbies, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Like if it's just a hobby, why take away from practice time that you could be doing for comics? So I do accept that point. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, and for me, I've had the Spanish guitar thing too, but for me, it was always accordion, because when you think about it, accordion, you learn music and you get upper body strength.
I have never heard a more Upper Michigan statement than "I want to learn accordion."
Have you ever seen an accordion player with thin arms?
You actually triggered my asthma, you son of a bitch.
Well,
have I ever seen my lungs immediately seized up? Have I ever seen an accordion player with thin arms? What a stupid statement. That's so funny. I love the idea that to you, an accordion player is sexy with his big, strong arms. Like, that's how you get the ladies. Oh boy, accordion, that's where the money's at. Oh
think
boy.
About it. It's chest exercise, it's arm exercise. Those people are huge from the waist up.
Oh my God. How many papa weddings did you go to in Upper Michigan where you're like,
listen, I lived in Michigan. It was not an official wedding without a priest and an accordion player.
I was going to say, every time I've ever heard of anything with Michigan, there's always some papa band in the background going, all right, we officially open this deli. It's like, what is with Michigan and the papa accordions? All right, anyway. So let's jump into our next question from Michael over at patreon.com/ComicLab. And just a reminder, you too can ask questions of the show over at patreon.com/ComicLab at the $5 level. We would love the support and we would love to hear your questions. So join us over there. Michael writes, currently I'm trying to write a long album story. Michael, you've given yourself away as a European with the use of the word album. Currently, I'm trying to write a long album story. I won't fret the details, but I've got the background and I've got the setting. Now I wrote the first part. I actually have trouble to think of the great happening that throws the whole story upside down and makes the main character move and develop himself to the next level. How do you build the actual story? Brad, this is a fantastic question from Michael. How do you build the pieces of the story? Yeah.
And that what you're talking about is the inciting incident, right? The great happening in writing, we also often call that the inciting incident. And there's been volumes written on inciting incidents. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about something that I just sprang on my storytelling students yesterday. Was my first day back teaching storytelling at University of the Arts. And did I tell you, Dave, they put me in an auditorium? I'm finally back where I belong, in an auditorium, theater style seats. I've got a podium. I've got a microphone. It's the best.
I just want to know, are you wearing a tie?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Everyone, imagine this. Never mind accordions with their huge arms. Brad Geiger in a tie. Make an orderly line, ladies. Look out. Here we go.
A pressed suit, dress pants. Everything,
how many korma stains or spaghetti stains on the shirt? Would you say one on a scale of 1 to 10?
I bought a brand new shirt.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. No, I listen, I clean up pretty well for this class. So and I'll have to tell you, I just remembered a story I'll tell you off the air, but no, I cleaned up very, very well for this. And I'm telling my students, and I came up with something that I call the Butso method. And I found a clever way of springing this on my students. I won't take you down that road, but I told them that if you can write a Butso statement, you can usually find where the story is. And that's a character has a want or a need, but there's something standing in the way, so they do something. Right. And if you can boil your story down, and this is what I'm going to suggest to this person that's writing us. First, they've got a character and they've got a setting, and that's great. I love it. That's a great place to start. What you need now is to ask yourself what that character wants or needs, right? And when you really get into writing, you'll find out that a want and a need are two different things. And when you're talking about character motivation, sometimes you can play with both of those things. Like, for example, in The Office, the NBC sitcom, Michael Scott wanted a family. That was really at the heart of who he was as a character. Michael Scott wanted a family. He needed to calm down about it, but he wanted a family. He had wants and needs. If you can determine, and go back and listen to the previous episode, we talk about this in quite a bit of detail. If you can go back and determine what your character wants or what your character needs, and then ask yourselves, what's preventing that from happening? Or maybe you have to put something there to make the story interesting. You've got a character with a want or a need, but there's an obstacle. So the character's got to do something, right? To take care of that obstacle. If you can write that but-so statement for your character, I think you can start to really figure out what your story is about.
Yeah, I know we always reference Star Wars, but it's a universally known story, so it's good to talk about. So Luke Skywalker's want or need is he wants to get out of his one-horse town, or in the case of Tatooine, the no-horse town, a Krek Dragon town, or whatever town it is. And so, but his uncle is like, no, you've got to, you promised me one more season on the farm, whatever the hell it was they were farming. Moisture, I guess. I guess they were just farming water.
They were moisture farmers, yes.
But what to what end? What did they farm with that? There was not a plant in sight. They just gathered water. What did they do with it?
I always thought people came and picked up the water and took it someplace else to use it.
And took it into Mos Eisley or something. All right, anyway. So they were water gatherers is what they were. They were fancy water gatherers. Anyway, he's like, I need one more season out of you. So at that moment, that's the obstruction. Obviously, the inciting incident is Luke leaves for a hot second. And in that exact moment is when the Empire comes in, kills his aunt and uncle. The exciting incident is now he no longer has a control on his want. He can now be launched out into the universe on his adventure, right? So I often find the most interesting inciting incidents are external to the character. It's either a series of accidents, a series of choices that were made on behalf of the main character, a situation that they've suddenly been placed in that flips on its head all their preconceived notions of how life should go. And so it advances how their thinking has to start going. There are some inciting incidents, I think, that can start from within the character. But usually, if those are like a psychological break caused from an external. So even in that case, it's most often for me, the best inciting incidents are all externally caused. Brad, am I being too limiting on that?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. And that's that lightning strike that comes in, turns everything upside down and starts the ball rolling. Now, if you need a little extra push after your butso statement and your inciting incident, I'm going to go back and tell you to look at a narrative archetype, right? To help you decide what should come next. And there's a lot of them to choose from. You could choose the hero's journey. We just talked about Star Wars, and George Lucas followed the hero's journey the way you and I follow the back of Kraft macaroni and cheese when we're making lunch, right? He just went step by step by step by step. Hero's journey is very good. It's also a little complicated for your first time out, and it's a little rigid. We talked last week about something I've been using for the last couple of years, and that's the story circle that Dan Harmon talked about. And it's an 8-step circular process, and it doesn't tell you what to do. It more tells you the sorts of things that your character goes through on their journey. And for me, I kind of write my story first or write it in broad strokes. I'll write what the character does. Boom, 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 boom. Everything maybe could fit on one page, right? Not dialogue, not anything, just what happens with this character. Then I'll put that up against the story circle, and I'll say, okay, here's where the character realizes that they've got to make a change and something's got to happen. And then I'll go, boom, okay, this satisfies that part of the story circle. This satisfies the next part of the story circle. And then I'll see maybe that I skipped one. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I need a space in there where the character realizes that they've paid a price for the choices they've made. And since I didn't do that, this story isn't going to be as good. It's not going to hold up as well. In other words, what that story circle is, you could use it to say, okay, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, right? The ingredient approach. And that's, if it's your first story, that's fine. Or you can, if you've got an idea of what the story is going to be, do what I do. Put it up against the story circle and see if you're missing a place. A lot of times it's going to show you weaknesses that you didn't know were there. This last story I wrote, it was like I put it up against the story circle. I realized I hadn't hit this one theme or this one emotional turn. And then I'm like, oh, what am I going to do for that? All of a sudden it hit me like a thunderbolt. And I came up with the greatest ending for this story that I would have never come to otherwise, unless I had put this up against a archetype. I wrote, I think this chapter I'm writing right now might be the best chapter I've ever written. And it was because all of these things came together. And I did a but-so statement. I wrote my story. I put it up against this story circle, and it showed me, without knowing what was missing, it showed me what was missing. I'm going to suggest you do the same thing. Figure out who your character is. Figure out what they want. Then figure out what's in the way. Once you do that, you've got a story started. And then once you get an idea, put it up against an archetype like the story circle or the hero's journey, or there's any number of other ones. You can look into Christopher Booking's 7 stories if you need some more. Put it up against one of those archetypes. It'll give you an idea of maybe if there's something missing. Dave, what do you think about that approach?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in with, if you're a person that likes to compare yourself to structure, you can obviously go Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. You can go Dan Harmon's Story Circle. The other one that I was going to add in, Brad, was Save the Cat, which is that sort of classic screenwriter's outline. Save the Cat for some people is incredibly helpful, so that one might be helpful. But in all cases, I think in the case of an inciting incident, you have to first establish who your character is, establish what the conditions of their life are that are normal, quote unquote, right? And whatever the inciting incident is, it has to be enough to shake that definition of normal. So in Harry Potter's case, he was living under a stair with an abusive family, right? That was his definition of normal. Suddenly he gets a letter by Owl, and his whole world is shaken up, right? It's an external coming in and shaking up what his normal is. So that's what you got to think of with your inciting incident. What is your definition of normal for this character prior to the inciting incident? And then what can be enough to shake them up to get them on the road and moving down the hero's journey or down the story circle or down the Save the Cat path, and then you're on the way. So good luck with it. I think that's a really fun and interesting question, and it's one that all of us face in terms of how to get the character going with the inciting incident.
Absolutely. And Dave, we've got time for one last question from our Patreon backers. And I've got one I'd particularly like to throw at you. This one comes in from Jay Pereira, who says, Do you have a studio routine that gets you into your mindset for the day? Do you get a drink, light some candles, put on a little death metal and get to work? Or is the process just entering through the studio door and seeing your drawing table or Wacom enough? So Dave, let's talk about studio routines. Do you have any routines that you do that get you ready to work?
What a fun question. I do. And I don't use them all the time, but when I do, it's because I'm intentionally trying to get myself sort of in the mood. That sounds terrible. Here is what I will do. Here is the guaranteed ways to at least set the scene for me comic making. It's usually with writing, because writing to me is the point where that's what I'm trying to instigate. Once there's already an idea, nothing can stop me from getting to that drawing table. Maybe you feel the same way, Brad. I never need an impetus to get to the drawing table. I almost always need an impetus to get writing. And so for me, the sort of trigger events that I try to use is I make a big stein, literally a stein of coffee. I get these IKEA beer mugs and I fill them with coffee. I sit down at my in my office I have a comfortable little chair. I put on maybe a candle. I put on music. I try to have either music without words, like Mozart, for example, or a language that I don't speak well. So I'll do like French jazz or something because I don't speak French. And then
or in
every
my
once
case,
in a while,
English.
What's that?
Or in my case, English.
Brad will just put on Oompa Oompa music. That'll get him going. Then he knows his arms will be huge. So, and then every once in a while, I will crack the window to my studio and I have a little fountain outside of my window that I turn on because water features are really between coffee, soft music, a candle, and water feature. Now, Brett,
running to the bathroom every 5 minutes.
No, I love it. It probably drives Beth nuts when she comes to work, but I love a water feature. So for me, that just gets me into sort of a Zen state where I know I've got nowhere else I need to be. It tells my body, like, this is what we're doing now. We're writing now. And then I will sit and stare blankly in front of me for 30, 40 minutes while I try to come up with an idea. Now, Brad, how about you? What sort of routines or habits do you have to get you writing?
I don't know. I don't know that I have habits and routines. In fact, I'm a little bit nervous about routines because then, like, if I had to sit in one particular chair to get an idea, then if I can't find that chair or if I'm not near that chair on that day, then it'll be counterproductive. I'm like, oh, well, I can't get an idea as I don't have my chair. I don't have my idea chair. So I try not to fall too much into habits and routines just because I don't like the idea of being trapped by them, you know?
Well, yeah, I that's a valid point. Let me ask you though, where do you write your ideas?
Sometimes in this chair, sometimes in that chair, sometimes in the chair behind me, sometimes at home. I'll sit on the bed. Sometimes lately, I've been going out on the back deck. Sometimes I'm on the front deck. Okay,
so good. You have various chairs in your life, but when you can't
with a
get
butt like this,
you have accordion player arms, but the butt of a cartoonist. There we go.
That's right. That's right.
Let me ask you though, what do you do when you can't get an idea?
I move chairs. I move I'll go find someplace else. Or sometimes if I can't get an idea and it's not happening, I'll go do something else. Cause it's like, it ain't happening. I'm going to do something else. Cause right now it's clear this ain't happening.
Well, don't you find that is your attempt at trying to create ideas by a physical movement that you can repeat?
Perhaps. I know you're trying to make this happen, but you're stretching the meaning of the word routine so wide that it is starting to lose some of its meaning.
Hold on, Brad. Are you trying to tell me, Brad, that you don't breathe when you're trying to write? Because that's a routine.
That's a routine.
Breathing is a routine. You're lying to me.
When I think of a routine, I think of Mr. Rogers walking in, taking his cardigan off, hanging it up, taking his shoes off, putting the tennis shoes on. And he did that every day, day after day after day. That's a routine. That's something you do every day.
In that case, it's a child show meant to show a pattern, but it's also that specific thing. If you were to do that exact thing every day, that would be OCD. If you walked into your house, sang a song, hung your sweater up, put your shoes away. But I think any element of me grabbing a coffee, turning on a candle, putting on music, or opening the window, putting the fountain on, any of those is me trying to trigger a writing process mood. And that's a little bit of routine. You finding that you can't write in chair 1, so you move to chair 2, if that's not a routine, that's at least a strategy, don't you think?
That's absolutely a strategy. And it's something I do. If I'm having trouble and something's not happening at this table, I will literally go to the other desk in my studio and sit there. And I don't know why I do it. And I don't know how often it works, but sometimes it's just like, I feel and I just went through this for that 2 weeks I was dealing with writer's block. That was really stopping me. Sometimes you just feel like you got to do something. I've been sitting at this page, this blank page, convinced that I can never improve the blank page. And after an hour of nothing happening, even the act of standing up and moving to the other chair, at least you accomplished that. It's like what did you do at work today, honey? Well, wait till you hear this. I moved chairs. I went from one chair to the other.
Okay, yes, I agree with that. I just realized another routine that you have that you're ignoring. Dr. Hidalgo's Lugubrious Cherry Soda, you son of a bitch. You always crack one of those open when you have to write. Always.
That's right. I always write when I've got a can of Dr. Hidalgo's Lugubrious Black Cherry Soda.
And remember, we here at Dr. Hidalgo say, when you need a routine, the best routine you can have is lugubriousness. Dr. Hidalgo's Lugubrious Cherry Soda. But what I'm saying is, if you don't want to call it a routine, which I'm comfortable that you don't want to call it a routine, you have certain triggering actions that you try to get yourself into a moment of like, now we're going to write. And sometimes that is, I'm going to lift my body up, move into a different chair. Sometimes I'm going to have a Dr. Hidalgo's. Because really what we're trying to do is, none of us ever, there's no routine when the magic of creativity strikes. Like sometimes my wife could say a word like, oh, it was phantasmagoric. But hearing the word phantasmagoric immediately triggers a whole bunch of ideas. I go, hold on a second. I've got to jot down a comic, right? That kind of thing. You've had that. I've had that. We've all had that, where some life event triggers a whole thing where you have to pause what you're doing and write down an idea. That's all well and good. That's the magic of creativity. And who knows, like sometimes a problem that you've been working on in the back of your brain, somebody says one thing while they're washing dishes to you, and all of a sudden the problem is solved. You've got it figured out based on this one weird thing that happened to click in your brain. That's creativity that you can't explain. But what we're trying to do with routines is trigger writing when it's not there, when it's not happening naturally, when it's not a lightning strike. And I think, Brad, you do have routines. You go to your studio, you sit in your chair, you drink Dr. Hidalgo's. All of those are routines, right?
To a certain extent, yes. And one thing that comes very close to that idea that I've talked about before is that I need to have something audible playing when I'm inking. Penciling as well, and I'm like you in that I can't play music that has words because I start following the words. When I'm inking, I can be a little bit more loose, but I think I've shared this with you before. I've got to find just the right stuff to play in the background when I'm inking. It's got to be just interesting enough that I'm not bored by it, but not too interesting that I get distracted by it.
And that's where the Game Show Network comes in perfect.
Yes, I am serious as a heart attack. I can put the Game Show Network on. Match Game is playing. It's just interesting enough that I'm sitting there just happily drawing away. But I know it's never going to get so interesting that I'm going to get distracted by it. Game shows are perfect for this.
What's amazing to me about the Game Show Network, and maybe it's just me, But
Yeah.
anytime I've ever tuned into the Game Show Network, it's always on the most obscure 1970s game show that I've never heard of before. And so I'll be like, I wonder what Brad sees in the Game Show Network. Let's check it out. And I tune in. It's like, all right, who's ready to play? Smack That Hedgehog. I'm like, Smack That Hedgehog? What the hell was this game show in the 70s? I have no. And in the meantime, Brad's in Philadelphia humming happily. Ooh, I love Smack That Hedgehog. Oh, this is one of my favorite games.
Yeah, and then my son will come in and like he goes, Dad, we'll put a quarter on this one, see who gets it first. And then we'll end up, playing the game show along with it. That does get a little distracting, but it's fun because it's my son. But yeah, and I'll sit there and go, and the announcer will come on, and I'll go, okay, who's the announcer? I'll give you $1 for that. He goes, I don't know. That's Johnny Olson. The guy goes, this is Johnny Olson for The Price is Right. And he goes, how do you do that? I said, it's a sign of a misspent childhood.
I want to applaud you for teaching your children the most useless knowledge you could as a father. That's great.
I can tell you that Rod Roddy replaced Johnny Olson after he died on The Price is Right.
Oh my God, Brad, seek help. This is not knowledge you need or want. Your boys are going to get to the SAT and be like, well, wait a minute. Where's the questions about Rod Roddy? Hold on.
Where's the Rod Roddy questions?
What's all this algebra and geometry stuff? I got to know. My dad only taught me about who replaced Olsen on The Price is Right. What?
Where on the SAT test does it ask whether this is a Mark Goodman, Bill Todman production?
Oh my God. All right, boys, which one of you knows who produced Smack That Hedgehog? Now, come on in. I'll give you a quarter to whoever knows who produced Smack That Hedgehog.
Well, I'll tell you what we've produced is yet another episode of ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
This has been another Mark Goodman production. Please tune in next. Coming up is Smack That Hedgehog. First aired in 1973. The show ran for 3 episodes. Due to the death of the hedgehog, the show had to be discontinued. But you'll want to check out the episodes here on the Game Show Network. Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, who knows the answer to this question: who was the first host of The Price is Right?
I don't know that one.
Bill Cullen, no points awarded this round. Co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, also known as the Dean of Game Show Announcers, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And I, as your friend, as always, am amazed that you were able to get married. The ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that like a 1973 game show. All right, when President Carter first entered the White House, his phrase was, "I would blank that blank." That's right. His answer was, "I would smack that hedgehog." All right, coming back from the break, Brad has 500 points on the board. He's ready, I think, to smack that hedgehog.
Yeah, I'm ready to play Smack That Hedgehog. No whammies, lots of smacks.
Okay, Brad, here's your choice. You can either take the brand new Lincoln Continental. Yes, that's right, the 1978 Lincoln Continental with suicide doors. You're going to love it. Or your choice is $500,000 if you smack that hedgehog. What are you going to do, Brad?
I'm going to smack that hedgehog.
He's going to smack that hedgehog, everybody.